Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So, cannabis is, an issue that lots of people want to talk about. It's something that Biden has been talking about potentially legalizing in the United States. He's decriminalized small possession of. Some people think that legalization of marijuana was what got Justin Trudeau elected. When was it? 8 years ago. We've had, I think, for the first time ever, just announced that you can order cannabis to be delivered to you by Uber Eats, and so it's a industry that has come from nowhere a decade ago to more. I've been told 4 times as many outlets in Ontario as LCBOs. So a dramatic amount of distribution, and yet in Mississauga and some cities it's still prohibited. You can't distribute it. So it's an interesting topic that I wanted to reach out to an expert, Gavin Clark, who is an expert in cannabis, an industry executive for a long period of time, a consultant, and someone that's done speeches and presentations on the topic, to talk about cannabis this evening, so we can really understand the industry. Gavin Clark has a deep understanding of cannabis and the developing industry in Canada, as well as internationally. This includes cannabis's many beneficial properties and medicinal applications, as well as the legal framework regarding it in Canada. Gavin's a graduate of Western Ontario in political science, and he's been a medicinal cannabis patient for more than 25 years and has been researching various aspects of cannabis use for many more. He's currently a managing director of Delta 8 Pharmaceuticals. He's involved in research and development work in medical cannabis, and he's worked as a C-suite executive for a licensed producer of cannabis here in Toronto. Gavin Clark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian.
So
Thanks
tell
for having
me,
me.
My pleasure. So tell me, given your background and that you've had this, incredible lifetime of experience, first-hand experience, both as a user medicinally as well as executive experience, how did you develop your knowledge of this sector?
It's a good question. Over a very long period of time, but initially started with my own trials and tribulations, my own medical issues that, unfortunately for me, as I'm sure many others, started at a young age. I was hospitalized at the age of 13 and underwent extensive surgery on my abdomen. And a year later, I was rehospitalized and diagnosed with Crohn's disease. So by that time, I was about 14 years of age. And over the next couple of years, I had a lot more trouble. I had increasing troubles with the severity of my Crohn's disease, multiple surgeries in and out of hospital. But what I came across, which I imagine most people come across about that time in their life, was cannabis. I guess I'm a bit chagrined to say I came across it in the school environment, but that's what happens. And after experimenting with it, I discovered that some of my symptoms seemed to go away. And it was something that I struggled with for a long time. Definitely didn't want to talk to my doctor about it at the time. It was verboten, forbidden behavior. It was something that I wasn't even sure myself that my symptoms were really being addressed properly. But sure enough, as time went on and I kept confirming this to myself, I became more and more sure of myself in that, and I began seeking out materials on it, which were few and far between at the time. I remember at one point, the most I could get my hands on was an article from National Geographic. But since about the age of 14, 15, I've been reading everything I can get my hands on to do with cannabis, to do with it as a social issue, the chemistry of it, the legality of it, et cetera, et cetera. I always figured the legality of cannabis would, legalizing it would take a long period of time. So I chose to study political science in school because I wanted to have a profession, a law profession, and be an advocate for those like me that needed medical cannabis. And much to my surprise, it was a much speedier affair to get access to medical cannabis in Canada, fortunately.
So some people think that medical cannabis is a joke, doesn't really exist. You firmly believe that cannabis has medical properties. Is that correct?
I know that medical cannabis has medical properties. Period. It's irrefutable, and to some extent that's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, if you ask a patient what their subjective experience is when they use a compound, it's, as I said, it's within the eye of the beholder. If they're telling you their symptom is received, who are you to argue with? And now, if you can, prove scientifically that's not the case, then that maybe so. But there seems to have been a tendency from the medical community to disbelieve in the first place, not want to listen to it. And slowly but surely, people have come around. And I guess one thing I might point out, even as we sit here talking about this now, to be a practicing pharmacist or a doctor in Canada, unfortunately, you don't have to have any knowledge of the endocannabinoid system or of the chemistry behind cannabis. And you can prescribe it. You can forbid your patient access to it, et cetera. And it's the only major system I could think of in the human body that a doctor could say that they don't have any knowledge of and yet still have a medical license to practice.
We're talking tonight with Gavin Clark, an expert in cannabis. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Gavin. We're going to talk about legalization, the state of distribution, the state of the industry, about medical properties, what's going to happen in the United States. It's going to be a good, well-rounded, all-encompassing conversation about the cannabis market. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Gavin Clark. Gavin is a cannabis industry executive. He's a consultant. He's been a speaker at conferences in Canada and the United States. And he's been a medical user of cannabis for 25 years, someone that fervently believes in medical properties of cannabis and understands the legal framework and the distribution and what's going on in this sector of the industry. And so I thought it'd be really helpful to reach out to Gavin and understand a little bit more about what's going on. So Gavin, we had a huge amount of optimism about the industry. Lots of people invested in stocks. Lots of people wanted to open up their own licensed producer or cannabis store or whatnot a couple of years ago when Trudeau legalized cannabis. Tell us where we are today versus what we thought we'd be a couple of years ago when cannabis got legalized.
We're closer to the rubber meeting the road to where reality actually is compared to, unfortunately, what saw a lot of this industry being built was hype. Frankly, it was people coming in the industry and making assumptions about the size of the black market per se. And I find it ironic because the reference to black itself is a reference to being invisible, so the unknown. So if it's unknown, how can you quantify it? And so it was just it was an invitation to make massive assessments of what this market might be, and then go out and make, I won't say misrepresentations, but representations that some people would try to substantiate on the size of the future market, and then sell shares in a company based on that. And a lot of companies, because of the way the legislation evolved, you could only get a license to produce cannabis for medical purposes first until Trudeau was elected and the Cannabis Act was brought in. And so that two completely different things. But I guess what I would say is that people used medical cannabis to get their foot in the door, as it were, for what they knew would ultimately come, which is the recreational market. And it was overhyped, it was overblown. And there was very much an attitude of, if you build it, they will come, as opposed to, most practical business thinking is to expand the business as the business comes. And I think one of the big problems with where we are today was this analogy that's gone on in business schools and elsewhere, where it's been compared directly to the beer industry. And that's a mistake. They're completely different. The only thing that they have in common are that it's your recreational dollar. And I think looking at the way that the big producers have gone about this, there's been a rush to get market share. That was the assumption, is that the landscape would end up looking like the alcohol and brewing industry. You'd have a few big players. So it was all about capacity. How do we serve that capacity? We have a rush to build out. We have a rush to buy other assets that we think are add value and whatnot. And yet all the while, they're not actually building the business, in my eyes, in terms of when you look at this problem from a pure economic standpoint, the recreational market, quote unquote recreational market, is what you would call an elastic market. The medical market is what you would call an inelastic market. So in terms of a business proposition, what you want to do is you want to secure as many medical patients as you can. And why? Because you're not going to have any customer turnover or little customer turnover with them. If you're accurately addressing their symptoms with a product, they're going to come back again and again. If you're trying to sell somebody a product for recreational purposes, you have no idea why they've bought the product in the first place. So these are completely different business propositions that have been melded further down the road. For the purposes of, unfortunately, I would say in a lot of cases, it seems like a pump and dump. There seems to be a lot of companies that aren't even around anymore that had grand ideas.
Okay, so let's break this down in a couple of manners. So number one, I guess what you're saying is that there's too much supply of product, that there was way too many producers. Is that correct?
There is an awful lot of, there's a tremendous amount of terrible supply on the market. That's the other thing I would say.
Terrible, bad quality supply.
Yeah, bad quality. Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, this is the other, I guess the other part of the problem is it's like anything else. You want to produce a good product. And that's why the sales aren't materializing the way they thought they would. There is a dearth of bad quality product. What was out there before in the black/gray market is not being replaced with the people that are licensed. There are some great producers out there. There is some great product. It is slowly changing, and just in this past year, the micro producers are beginning to overtake the macro producers in terms of the market, and that's showing you really what the consumer is saying. The consumer is finally being heard in economic terms, if you will, and what they're saying loud and clear is, "I want quality product." Where you get quality product, you get it from small batches, from people who take a great interest in it, like anything else, like the microbrewery industry. If you want so beer, we all know you can go to your local and get it from the tap of one of the big three, let's say. But if you want something special, you got to seek it out. And it seems like it's the same in cannabis.
Okay, so this is interesting. Let's talk about, how do you define quality? So this is what, THC level or the taste of it, or what's high quality?
Unfortunately, in the marketplace, that's, if you go into a dispensary, I won't say an OSC location, but any dispensary across Canada, that's initially what is emphasized is the THC count. That's what they'll start talking to you about, is the potency of something, as if that's the only thing that counted. And as an expert in these matters, I can tell you it's not just THC that is the active compound here. We have other compounds present that moderate how all of these other cannabinoids work, and they can either make them more potent, they can make them less potent, they can totally inactivate them, etc. So it's a very, very complex equation.
Okay, so let's take a step back, just in case people don't know much about cannabis. Tell me, what are the different components? So what's THC, what's CBD, what are the components of a cannabis product that one needs to be knowledgeable about?
Right. So in the marketplace, what's identified on the packaging by law is the THC numbers and CBD numbers that are referred to. Increasingly, terpenes are being listed. Terpenes are a group of compounds that occur in the entire plant kingdom that make things smell and taste like different substances. So some of these terpenes. Let me back up a second. The definition of a cannabinoid under scientific terms is anything that is observed to exert action on the endocannabinoid receptors in our body. So there are over 400 compounds in cannabis, and they are slowly reclassifying some of them as cannabinoids or as terpenes that act as potentiators of cannabinoids. So you have primary binding sites in your endocannabinoid system, and you have secondary binding sites. And these additional compounds, they bind at the secondary sites and moderate how the primary compound acts in the first place. So I'll give you a quick example that might some people out there might be able to relate to in terms of common complaints with cannabis. That a lot of people don't like what are known as sativas, strong sativas, that they'll make them paranoid and they get very high, et cetera. And they would rather have what's known as an indica. They would rather relax and have a laugh and be sleepy. The presence in sativa plants of certain terpenes like limonene. Limonene is what makes lemons and limes smell like lemon and lime. Limonene speeds THC across the blood-brain barrier. So the presence of limonene with THC makes THC seem more potent than it actually is. And there are a myriad of other terpenes and compounds that are having this effect. And within the industry, within the scientific academic study of this, this is known as the entourage effect, the synergistic effect between these compounds. And it is a matter of a subject of intense study amongst all kinds of academics around the world. And it is uniquely fascinating.
Really, that's interesting that these terpenes have such an accelerator or dampening impact. Just take a step back and explain. THC is the portion that is psychoactive. Is that correct?
Well, in THC delta 8, yes. There are THC occurs on the plant as THC acid, which is not psychoactive as it occurs in the form of the plant. It needs to be heated. It loses a chemical bond, and it then becomes delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That applies to a whole bunch of these cannabinoids. They occur in nature as what are known as acidic-based cannabinoid compounds. They need to be heated. Sometimes it's simply by the sun on the plant that heats it and what calls decarboxylates these compounds and transmutes them into a slightly different compound that's then psychoactive. And most times it's the burning of the organic matter when you roll up a cannabis cigarette, a joint per se, and lighting it on fire, right then and there, it's the THC acid is being turned into THC, which is psychoactive. And that applies to a lot of these other chemicals as well. Okay, CBD, there's CBD acid. And if I can just back up for 1 second, all of these chemicals originate in the plant as something known as cannabigerol, CBG. And cannabigerol is getting a lot of attention. And cannabigerol first materializes in the plant, and there's a maximum sort of genetic potential for CBG. And then the CBG chemically turns in either THC or CBD or some of these other minor cannabinoids. And that's how you get the total cannabinoid makeup of the plant, is they all emerge from CBG, essentially.
Okay. So I'm more confused now. So I thought THC was the psychoactive part, and you say it has to get heated up or burnt to become that. And I thought CBD was an anti-inflammatory part, but didn't have the psychoactive properties. Is that correct or not?
CBD does not have psychoactive properties. However, I would encourage people to look up the definition of psychoactive. I believe it's interchangeable with another term that doctors use, which is escaping me immediately. But food can have a positive effect on your mood. And that's essentially the definition of psychoactive, is mood-altering substances. Food, caffeine, there are many other substances in our environment that we don't view the same way. But yes, THC generally is considered the psychoactive component of cannabis. CBD is not psychoactive. In fact, CBD counteracts the effects of THC. So with the presence of CBD, let me put it this way: if you were to administer THC and CBD in equal amounts, the CBD theoretically should cancel out the THC.
Really?
Now,
I didn't know that.
There are differences from person to person, like anything else. A lot of these processes in our bodies are controlled by enzymes that break down the cannabinoids, and how many enzymes we have in our metabolism, and that all affect these things.
But there's lots of products that you hear about that are CBD oil. So they're just CBD related, and they're after anti-inflammatory properties, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And generally in these CBD products, there's a paranoia around any THC in these CBD products. And you will see many of them that guarantee zero THC. And it makes me laugh for a few reasons. One of them is, which I just said, CBD counteracts it and acts as an antagonist. As where THC is an agonist, but it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
So we've talked about there being too much supply and too much bad supply or bad quality supply. You also talked about medical versus recreational. Any idea what percentage of the industry is medical versus recreational?
That's a really good question. Unfortunately, not nearly enough. I would say to take a guess at it, I've never seen any numbers. I would say that between 15 to 25% tops would be medical. The rest are pursuing quote unquote recreational.
And you think this hell-bent pursuit of the recreational isn't really smart business?
I don't think, and the fundamental, when you get down to hardcore Adam Smith rules of economics, I don't think it makes a lot of sense the way they've built it out. I think if you want to attract customers who are buying a product for unknown reasons, I don't think you go about it the way that they've gone about it. And I think some of the bigger players that have moved into the marketplace have made a silly calculation on why they've moved into the marketplace. I think there are people that have made the analysis that they're in the business of selling recreational dollars, and that cannabis comes along and has the potential to take away these recreational dollars, that people are no longer going to spend their dollars on, let's say, some kind of alcohol. So somebody with that interest then invests a lot of money into a cannabis business without a clear understanding of where they're going, without a clear roadmap of what's going on. And they seem to be mostly motivated by having their core business taken away. And how do I justify that to my shareholders? And how do I demonstrate to my shareholders that, cannabis isn't sucking away our dollars? Because to them, whether somebody's drinking beer or consuming cannabis, they don't care. They just want to profit from it.
Right. So investor expectations have not been spectacular. Profits have not been there. Shares have typically gone down. This is because of why? Because they've been overly bad quality oriented or not great quality oriented, have supplied too much product and oversupplied the industry, and have been too focused on recreational and not enough on medicinal. Is that sort of your analysis?
Yeah, and there has been a plethora of people come in from other industries. I won't say that don't belong, but they don't have the experience that other people that have been around in the gray market or in the other non-traditional industry that existed beforehand. And those are the people that are really the gatekeepers of the knowledge. And can really do some amazing things in terms of growing some great product, knowing some tricks of the trade, and understanding the market.
We're chatting tonight with Gavin Clark. He's an expert in the cannabis industry. We're sort of learning all about everything about cannabis tonight. Stay with us. We're going to be back in 2 minutes with Gavin. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Gavin Clark. He's a cannabis expert, industry executive, consultant, subject matter expert. He's been a speaker at conferences in Canada, United States. In a consulting capacity, he's worked for many different cannabis licensees to help secure their licenses from Health Canada, to advise on operations and business development issues. Currently, he's serving as the Chief Operating Officer for Echo Oils Inc., a Health Canada licensee based in Waterloo, Ontario, focused on cold-pressed cannabis extractions exclusively for medical use. Really? What are cold-pressed cannabis extractions?
That's a great question. Cold-pressed cannabis extractions are cannabis extractions that are solvent-free, solventless extractions. So they're typically, even if it's water, there's a solvent that's used to remove the chemistry from the vegetable material in cannabis. Cold pressed oils are a technology, proprietary technology in Echo Oil's case, that's been developed to produce some of the unique compounds from the plant I was talking about previously. It's very difficult to get the acidic based cannabinoids out of the plant without damaging them, without decarboxylating them, without making them psychoactive, without changing them permanently. Cold pressed oils, similar to, of course, cold pressed olive oil that most people would be familiar with. It's not necessarily cold per se, it's cold in relation to what hot might be considered. And like I said, it has the effect of extruding a whole dearth of compounds that are otherwise inaccessible. The other extraction methods that are commonly in use in the industry involve some pretty some chemicals that a lot of people wouldn't be happy about if they knew were in their products. Even in trace amounts that Health Canada considers okay or they deem clean. One of the most well-known one is butane, lighter fluid. And it's purified, but BHO, butane honey oil, has been known for a long time, and that's a common way of extracting cannabis. Any petrochemical has been used as a solvent. You can bet on that. Propane, all kinds of things.
What? And you're suggesting that these are present in trace amounts in a product that one might smoke?
I am, and it depends on the jurisdiction entirely. And I'm not. This conversation isn't just limited to Canada. I would say that if you look at different states allow for different levels of pesticides, even in a product, or allowable levels of pesticides. There are allowable levels of residual butane. Other solvents. So cold pressed oils never even introduce solvents to the equation. So they're never there.
And is this cold pressed technology of extraction something that you think is a major trend?
It is. If you go online, you can see there is a wide variety of people selling cold pressed oils. Most of them are actually, and a few people understand this nuance, most of them are made from hemp. Hemp and marijuana per se, which is not a word I care that much for. Hemp is part of the cannabis family. The only thing that distinguishes hemp is basically the law. It is what any cannabis that has less than 0.3% THC, 0.3% THC or less, is deemed to be hemp and not marijuana per se. Marijuana is a slang Spanish word for the dried tops of the female flowers of the plant.
Oh, really? So the whole plant's not called marijuana. It's just the dried female tops.
That's right. Yeah. And there's another word too that some people would be familiar with called sinsemilla, which is an West Indian word, which actually goes back to the Spanish, which means without seeds. So if you grow cannabis and you remove all the males before they have a chance to drop any pollen, you will get all females that don't have any seeds at all. And so all of their energy is spent growing their flowers, and they get nice, big, dense buds, flowers, inflorescences, as they're actually known. That's how you get great buds from cannabis.
Really interesting. Gavin, the medical impact of cannabis seems to be, quite significant in your life. And you've been using it, you say, for your Crohn's for 25 years. How is that? How is that knowledge? How does your knowledge impacted, what you want to do in this industry?
That's a good question. I mean, I want to help. Quite simply, I want to help reduce suffering of others. I've done enough of my own. Unfortunately, continue to. That's the comes with the territory, comes with Crohn's disease. There are lots of people that suffer for lots of different reasons. That's my overriding goal, is to ultimately help people with medical cannabis, and whether it's an access issue, whether it's formulating a drug that actually works for them. I've done everything in this industry from actually work the front door at a dispensary over 20 years ago, when they were pseudo legal for medical access, that is, to being the chief operating officer of a company that was exclusively devoted to medical cannabis.
Do you think that medical cannabis really is the future, or recreational? Because, as you say, you think 75 to maybe 80% to maybe 85% of the current users are using it for the psychoactive high they get.
Yeah, I think there's both. There's very much both in the future, and they'll look very different. Cannabis is poised to replace a lot of pharmaceutical drugs. It was said, there was a famous book written by Jack Harrow, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, where he said in it, by our time, by the 2020s, over 50% of over-the-counter medication would be replaced by a cannabis-based medicine. Well, we're not quite there, but I can tell you, I've been fortunate enough to ask to present at the cannabinoid-derived pharmaceutical conference, and I've seen other presentations for drugs based on cannabis, using cannabis as a primary feedstock, that are poised to replace the biggest selling drug in the world, that are poised to replace drugs that sell $5 to $6 billion a year.
Okay, so tell me, if it's possible, simplistically, why you think there's a medical benefit of cannabis. Like, what's the property? What does it do?
Well, quite simply, in your system, in your endocannabinoid system, there are a number of receptors. Some of them are located in your central nervous system. Others are located in your immune system and in other organs. You have CB1 receptors that primarily respond to things like THC. You have CB2 receptors, which primarily respond to things like CBD, anti-inflammatories. If you stimulate the CB2 receptor, you stimulate the immune system. And I would encourage listeners to, maybe even Google CB2 receptor and see what other, very well-selling pharmaceuticals on the market right now use that same mechanism of action to effectuate a very significant effect on even my disease. There is a dearth of autoimmune diseases that are controlled by stimulating the CB2 receptor. So when you ask me how I know that it works, that's how I know it works, because I watch, pharmaceutical companies right now, and for years have established multiple drugs that use the same mechanism of action. They're not cannabis-based drugs. They use a whole bunch of other synthetic mechanisms to get at that receptor. But it's a very roundabout way of doing something when you have a simple plant that grows out of the ground that you can.
So it's somehow impacting the receptor that influences our immune response. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. If you stimulate the CB2 receptor, you can control macrophages that are produced by white blood cells, like tumor necrosis factor. Tumor necrosis factor is one of the biggest causes of the escalation of symptoms of Crohn's disease and other autoimmune diseases. So you can commonly, on any given night, sit there and if you actually pay attention to a biologic ad that you might see on CNN or something like that, and they'll talk about these TNF blockers, these drugs that are TNF blockers, and that's what they're doing is they're getting at the CB2 receptor to block the production of to block the production of these macrophages by the white blood cells that in conditions like mine, attack healthy tissue. And it's an overactive immune system in conditions like mine. So they help bring it back into control.
An overactive immune system that you somehow bring back into balance.
It brings what they call it endocannabinoid tone. Using cannabis as medicine restores tone to the endocannabinoid system. That's the researchers, academics, when they talk about cannabis as medicine, that's the framework when they talk about it. And when doctors talk about it, they talk about cannabis as medicine is simply what restores function and allows you to live your life. That's the proposition of cannabis as medicine. So whether or not you have something that, is a cure per se, that's not necessarily medicine. It's something that helps restore function to your life. And let me tell you how cannabis has allowed me to have function in my life in the first place, and how I have been able to restore function in others. And it's wonderful to do. It's magnificent to see. And I'm thrilled to continue to be a part of that.
I understand that your wife also uses cannabis for medical purposes.
That's right. Yeah, my wife suffers from a number of rare autoimmune conditions, which they're unfortunately still in the process of analyzing. And I'm sure many listeners out there are familiar with that in one sense or another, frustrations of diagnosis from the medical community. But we're pretty sure that she suffers from lupus. As well as that, she has a number of other conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, some degenerative bone disease, etc. And some of these things are uniquely addressed by cannabis. And in her case, she is at the point where she can't function. Never mind restore function. She can't function without the cold pressed cannabis oil that she uses, that we have formulated for her. THC acid is one of the only compounds known to man that effectively dilates blood vessels. That's one of the problems in her condition is the blood vessels are constricted that go into her bones. The reduced blood flow leads to what they call osteonecrosis and eventual joint replacement. So, she's in her mid-40s. She's had both her knees replaced. She's expecting to have her hip replaced. She's expecting to have her shoulder replaced. Fortunately, we've been astounding the doctors in terms of being able to delay that, being able to put it off. And they're always interested what she's doing and what she's taking, and that's helping with that.
Fascinating. I'm glad it's working for the two of you. What's going to happen in the United States, do you think? Biden has been talking about decriminalizing small possession. What do you think is going to happen? Is it going to go the way of Canada?
I think eventually it will. It's a matter of when. And, the bipolar nature of American politics, the de facto, by design bipolar nature of American politics are going to leave us in a bit of limbo for a while. That's what I see. There's also, what they call these multi-state operators in the United States who are successfully, operating the cannabis industry. They don't want to see it legalized on a national level. It would not be to their advantage. So there's a lot of forces at play. And what I would say is, from a political scientist point of view, it doesn't seem likely that the Democrats are going to maintain control of the United States government in its entirety to be able to do what they want throughout the rest of Biden's term. So I unfortunately I see the Republicans standing in the way of legalizing cannabis on a national scale, and it will be left to a successor of Biden's to legalize it at some point. And until then, we'll continue to have this sort of controversy rage on between the recreational and medical, those who believe in, cannabis as medicine, those who believe that it's hogwash, and allowing recreational markets to evolve in microcosms and not in their entirety as a whole, as they should, as I believe they should, like any other worldwide market would.
We're chatting tonight with Gavin Clark. He's an expert on cannabis, about the cannabis market. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Gavin Clark. He is a cannabis industry executive, consultant, and subject matter expert. He has spoken about cannabis, about the legal framework, about medical properties, about distribution in Canada and the United States. He has, as a consultant, worked for many different Cannabis Act licensees to help them secure licenses from Health Canada, to advise on operations and business development. He's currently the Chief Operating Officer for Echo Oils, Inc., a Health Canada licensee based in Waterloo, focused on cold-pressed cannabis extractions exclusively for medical use. Gavin, I really appreciate your coming on the show and telling us a little about cannabis. So you said that you were surprised that cannabis was legalized as quickly as it was, that you were expecting to become a lawyer and have to fight for it for a long period of time. Do you think it was the right decision?
Undoubtedly. Yeah, it's just been tough watching some of the growing pains, I guess.
Was it done the right way?
No, it was
some
not
people
done
think that there's way too much distribution, that there's multiple outlets versus LCBOs, and you already told us that we shouldn't be comparing it to beer, but some people think that there should be sort of as many cannabis outlets as there are LCBOs, and that's the right way to think about things. And then other people have commented that there's still distribution is up to local municipalities, and so some municipalities, Mississauga being one for an example, haven't allowed stores, and so therefore some people think that they've allowed black markets to continue. So what do you think about the way we've actually legalized it and regulated it?
I think there's been a number of key mistakes that have been made, and what I would point out is that nobody's gone back and asked the courts what they think. Originally this has been a product of court decisions. Nobody's gone back and asked the BC Superior Court if they think that cannabis as medicine has been made available in the community. And that's not a municipal issue. That is federal domain. Municipalities have to find a way to allow for access in the community. And that's what the Allard decision said, that allowed for the establishment of the ACMPR, which preceded the Cannabis Act, which was the recreational cannabis. So
you live in Mississauga,
correct,
and you use cannabis for medical purposes. What you're saying is that the court said you should have the right to be able to buy it in your hometown, but you can't.
That's right, and I mean, what you would get as a retort back from bureaucrats, and I know because I've tried, is the way the law is written, anybody anywhere in Canada can access the same medical products because it's done through the mail. Well, I'm sorry, I don't. For a number of reasons, the mail may be inaccessible to me. I may not be able to get on a computer to be able to do that transaction. But quite simply, why is it so difficult to, I can walk down to a pharmacy and buy a Tylenol in my neighborhood? Why is it so difficult to have a similar access for something that our courts has deemed medicine? Something that our courts have said, this applies under Section 7. That you have, if you bar access to cannabis as medicine, you're interfering with somebody's Section 7 constitutional rights, their security of person. The same issue that was at issue in Morgenthau. You cannot bar somebody's access to, whether it's a medical procedure, whether it's a pill, it's medicine that relieves their suffering. And what I would say is that there has not been really any compliance I can see with that. And of course, that's the nature of the way our system's set up, is you have to go back and ask the court. The court can't just stand up and say, hey, the legislature hasn't done what we've asked them to do.
So why don't you start a court challenge?
That would be great. That would be great. It would be interesting to see where the starting point would have to be. But yeah, it's a constant frustration that I use. There's a product I use from OCS to control one of the bad symptoms I have, which is nausea. I have to drive to Longbridge to go to an OCS store to get access to it. So I have to get in my car and go, how many kilometers is it? I spend 45 minutes or so getting there, 45 minutes getting back to get medicine. And it's not right. And I think the issue has been muddled. I would be more than happy to educate anybody to come and talk to any group, especially legislators, about how this has evolved as law, where their responsibilities lie in complying with making some of these things law.
So why have some municipalities prohibited distribution?
Because I would say they don't understand the evolution of the legalization of cannabis in Canada. They've been told the way it is instead of finding out for themselves. And I would say that there are some people, and I'm not trying to be highly critical, but some people in politics who don't have the political science background to understand intimately how things are supposed to work and where responsibilities and obligations lie. And that just because you make something a bylaw doesn't make it legal.
Gavin, I think lots of people don't think that prohibition has ever worked, whether it be prohibition of alcohol or tobacco or marijuana, cannabis. Some people think that psychedelics should be legalized, and some people are researching psychedelics for trauma, PTSD, lots of different things. What do you think? Is it still right? You fought against criminalization of cannabis. Do you think it's still right that other drugs are criminal offenses if one sells them and uses them?
I think there are medical applications for a lot of substances that we're not aware of. I think we need to be very careful about how we stigmatize any investigation or any access to it. Like the prostitution equation, the problem is with the people who abuse other people in that social phenomenon. And I would say the same here. If you're going to take a social tack on it, it's with the people profiting off of distributing substances that may not be having a medical beneficial effect. But going after people who may be using ketamine or who may be using, quote unquote, magic mushrooms, psilocybin, for medicine, I don't think it makes any sense. It certainly doesn't seem legal to me, and under the spirit of our law, which is that people are seeking out to not suffer.
But if they're using it for recreational purposes, it should be illegal.
I think that's a different question entirely. I think as a democracy, that's up for debate as part of a political platform, as the way that cannabis was legalized for recreational purposes. Mr. Trudeau came along, made it part of his platform. Enough people voted for him. They came in, they replaced the ACMPR with the Cannabis Act. That's where we are. So if we decide as a society that the rest of us are okay with that, then I guess the rest of us are okay with that. And I'd love to pretend like I have all the answers, but I certainly don't, and I don't want to speak for others.
Gavin Clark, thank you so much for joining us tonight and telling us a little bit about the cannabis industry. Last question, is the cannabis industry going to grow in Canada, or is it going to flatline?
I think it will eventually grow. It's a matter of what the contraction will be until we see more growth. I have high hopes for it, to see it sort of slightly rearranged, I guess, in a number of ways. I think there are some larger players that are probably going to not be around anymore, and that will contribute largely to how the future looks.
Gavin Clark, cannabis expert, industry executive, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, Brian.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on 960am. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody. Thanks, Gavin.